Assalamu
Indeed,
alaikum viewers, welcome to yet another episode of Kashmir 360 Degrees. So, the guest with us today is a very well known personality of Indian origin living in the United States. I have with me today Dr. Muqtedar Khan, Professor of Political Science and International Relations and founder of Islamic Studies in the University of Delaware in America. He's received the Sir Syed Ahmed Khan Award for Service to Islam from the Aligarh Muslim University in India. He writes extensively for Newsweek and The Washington Post. Welcome to our show, sir.
thank you very much, Yana Mir, और आपके सुनने वालों को, to everybody. Salam, namaste, sat sri akal, vanakkam, and namaskaram.
Walaikum assalam. So you're well researched and aware of the geopolitical situation of the Islamic world. You've often quoted that Muslims have displayed an inability to move on with time. Does this perhaps explain the inadaptability to various forms of government, whether communist like China, where we notice the Uyghur uprising, or a compassionate monarchy like the UK, where there seems to be violence against Hindus and the LGBTQ community and calls to make UK Sharia compliant, or in a secular democracy like India, where Muslims are always up in arms against any new policy that's introduced by the government, be it UCC or NRC or CAA. And there are numerous separatist organizations around the world in countries with a sizable Muslim population, even African countries like Nigeria and Ethiopia, and even a peaceful country like the Philippines. So, how would you explain this phenomenon?
Yes, there are many Muslim separatist movements all across the world. You have the Moro movement in Philippines, and then you have across the world. You have Uyghurs in China. You have for a long time in Kashmir in India, and you also have movements in other parts of the world where Muslims, even in Muslim countries, you will see that there are separatist movements such as the Kurdish movement in Turkey.
Turkey, yes.
So the thing is that there are several things that we need to take into account to understand, because there is not a single explanation to all of this. After World War I and World War II, Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I, and the British Empire began to disintegrate after World War II. Some nation states were created. Like, for example, Saddam Hussein used to argue that Kuwait never existed as a country before, but it became independent later on. So when these nationalist movements, which are modern phenomena, but they are like old tribal phenomena. We just call the old tribal system as a modern national movements. Some national movements got their country and some didn't. So, for example, the Jewish nationalist movement got Israel in 1948, and other countries came, and the Kurds never got their country. And so they are a minority in 4 different countries. And they would have assimilated, but what Turkey tried to do was essentially deny them cultural autonomy, which means that they were not allowed to basically develop their language, the Kurdish language, which is slightly different. The Arab identity in some places and the Turkish identity tried to basically eliminate and erase the identity of the Kurds. And so they have rebelled and they have national aspirations. Some want cultural autonomy, some want total political and cultural autonomy. So there are some Kurds who, to be able to preserve their culture and language, some want an independent country. Even in North Africa, under the Arabs. So in North Africa, you have Berbers who nobody talks about, right, in Morocco, Tunisia. So the Arab identity has submerged, but there's no Berber nationalist movement. God forbid, otherwise it will continue to destabilize those countries. So one problem that you have across the Muslim world, because it is 1/4 of the world, 55 countries of over 200 countries in terms of population. Also, the Muslims are about 25% of the world. So the way countries emerge in the post-World War II, in the decolonization phase, is the way, like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh are all a consequence of British colonization and then decolonization, isn't it? So as these countries emerge, there is a border issues. So for example, India today has resolved its border issues with Bangladesh, but we still have border issues with Pakistan, with China. Even Nepal sometimes screams about some border issues. So one problem
So,
is
so
that.
broadly speaking, what you're trying to get at is that because there are so many Muslim countries, so it actually looks like the problem is mostly with Muslims just because there are too many Muslims. Is that what you're saying? But there are more Christians than Muslims,
Even
and there are more, for example, Buddhists than Muslims in the world. So just that, but they don't seem to be. They seem to be getting along quite well. For example, they don't. There are Buddhists living in China. They don't seem to have a problem. Hindus or Parsis or Buddhists or Jains or Jews or Christians living in India don't seem to be having a problem with the government's policies. So why does it zero down to Muslims who seem to be inadaptable? Does it have anything to do with the quote that you made that we're not able to move on with time?
I will come to the second part, but Muslims are bigger than the Buddhists. They're the second largest religion. And there
Okay.
are problems. Like if you look at Spain, there is a Basque movement in Spain. Very few years ago, the Quebecois of Canada nearly broke away. The
Mhm.
referendum was 49% to 59%. If it had been the
Mhm.
other way around, there would be two countries north of the United States. So there are lots of fault lines. In Belgium, you have this fault line between Flemish and Belgian. There are two different languages. So, but because these countries are strong democracies, and so, for example, Canada was willing to have a referendum for breaking up, and they fought it hard and they kept it together. So this is something that Turkey will never do. It will never have a referendum and ask the Kurds, would you like to stay in Turkey or leave? If they did that,
So,
then
so
the
if we apply this, so are you trying to say that holding a referendum is actually a good idea? And if we
no,
apply this to, for
no,
example, the long-standing dispute between India and Pakistan over Kashmir, do you think that that would be applicable there?
no, what I'm trying to say is that the reason why Canada was willing to do this, have this referendum, is because Canada has a long history of being democratic, right? So people who were from Quebecois, they realized that, look, our rights are not being violated as a minority. You
Mm,
speak French in Montreal. There's no problem with that. You speak in English in Toronto. So the problem is not that they realize that they are better off being part of Canada than being separate. So,
mm.
but the thing is that if Turkey, let's say, remains as good a democracy as Canada for, say, next 30 years, it gives all people all rights. You can practice whatever religion you want. You can speak whatever language you want. Then I guarantee you that after 30 years of democracy, if Turkey does have a referendum, the Kurds will choose to live in Turkey
To live
because
with Turkey.
rather than leave, right? Now, the other question about the broad problem as to why we have this is, let me explain to you the concept of modernity. I'm sure you've heard it a lot, but there's something fundamentally important to understand. You also have a structure in history. Whether you lived in England or whether you lived in Spain, if you were a French subject, your sovereign was always the French king, not where you
Mm.
lived. But in the modern era, you become a citizen of a country. You're not a subject of a king. So in
Right.
modern era, certain changes took place. Like sometimes people think that only white people are Americans. No, Americans can be anything. I'm American. Farid Zakaria.
But how does this, whatever you're explaining,
I'll tell you what
how
happens.
does,
How it changes.
yeah,
So now,
how does it connect with my question? Because my question is that, and the reason I asked you this question, now let's get down to business. So
so
Kashmir 360 basically revolves around finding a solution to the disputes in South Asia,
yes,
especially pertaining to the Kashmir region. So what I'm trying to say is that, does it have to do anything with this adaptability problem that Kashmir at one time promoted the Azadi narrative, and because of which the conflict stayed on for 30 years and so many people suffered?
see, Yana, once we went into the nation states, Muslims have not fully adapted to this fundamental idea of modernity within the nation state.
Okay.
So, for example, uh, now that you are a citizen of a country, you're loyal to that country. You're not loyal to a religion.
Yeah.
So that is something that Muslims are struggling to adjust to the modern nation state. So So what happens
So
is,
that's what I thank you so much. That is
that
probably
also
what
happens
I
because
wanted to hear you say.
yeah, that is
Yeah.
also law. So for example, I'm the advisor to one of the MSAs at the University of Delaware. And
Mhm.
I saw one of the requests was that they wanted to teach Muslim inheritance law.
Hmm.
And so I called the president of MSA and said, why are you doing this? Because
Hmm.
some of the things you're going to be preach are going to be illegal in the US.
Absolutely. Yes.
Are you going to teach your students?
So what do you think needs to be done? Because you're talking about the US, but I want to use some of your insights into, finding solutions for Kashmir, some of your own insights. So, for example, you said that this would become illegal in the United States, and yet we call United States a democracy. But if India tries to make certain things illegal, for example, proselytizing, that's okay to make it illegal in the UK and the United States, and they still get called democracies and healthy democracies. But if India were to do the same thing, then it's apparently, human right violation.
Your
Don't you
idea,
think?
your idea is good, but the example is wrong. Proselytization is permitted in both UK and the US. But let us say polygamy.
Okay.
Polygamy is forbidden in the United States. You'll go to jail if you practice polygamy. But now the problem with Muslims is that they say that no, God has permitted us to practice polygamy. Who is America? Who is India? Who is Pakistan to forbid this? So they have this clash of Islamic law versus local law. Even though Islamic law says obey the law of the land. So for Muslims, it is an Islamic law that they obey the law of India. Are you following the logic? It is an Islamic
Absolutely.
thing to do.
So its Prophet
But
Muhammad had,
yes,
peace be upon him, had said, "Hubul watan min al
ex-
iman," which obviously means that love
obey
for
the law of
your
the land.
country is
Yes,
equivalent to love for your religion. So, yes. So,
but our
but
mullahs
the
don't
point is that
preach that.
Muslims don't understand that.
Our mullahs don't preach that to our people, saying that the law of the land is an Islamic law. It is you're required by Islamic teachings to obey the law of the
So,
land.
so when the mullahs are obviously doing something, so when the mullahs are obviously doing something that goes against
Fundamentally
the
wrong.
laws of the country, that goes against the laws of the country, and also goes against the law of Islam,
Yes.
then why is banning these mullahs looked upon as a human right violation? For example, banning Jamaat-e-Islami in Kashmir was looked upon as a human right violation, as a violation of cultural and religious rights, and other
I'm not
such
sure.
decisions.
I,
Yes.
I'm not sure that that should be seen as a violation of the human rights. For example, the Congress promised to ban Bajrang Dal in Karnataka, didn't they? During the elections, they said that was one of their manifesto that if we win Karnataka elections, we will ban Bajrang Dal. So labeling an organization as antisocial and then banning it, like for example, Vallabhbhai Patel had banned RSS, Jamaat Islami was banned, I think, at the time of Indira Gandhi also in the past. So these organizations banned, they're not a violation of human rights. The violation of human rights, like if you look at the Indian Constitution from I think Article 14 onwards up to 30, there are listing of six fundamental rights of that. What would be a fundamental right is if you're not allowed to pray. If you say, oh, you cannot fast in month of Ramadan, that will be a violation of your religious right.
Obviously, nobody in a secular democracy would say you can't fast in the month of Ramadan. But yes, the Jamia Masjid of Srinagar was closed for, I don't know, maybe 4 whole years. Reason being that there were two reasons to it. The first reason was that a police officer named Ayub Pandit was lynched mercilessly in broad daylight
In the
out
masjid?
when he was patrolling outside
Yes.
Jamia Masjid in Srinagar. And then soon after that, a year or two after that, we were hit by the COVID pandemic, which is why the masjid remained closed. And it finally opened this year for Eid. But the point is that that was being made as a violation of fundamental rights. That was what was being told in the press, that India is violating fundamental rights of Muslims by keeping the Jamia Masjid closed. So, don't you think that if such kind of an activity, a gruesome activity took place in a place of worship, that was more of a sort of, a vandalization of Islam itself,
So,
more than more than the decision to keep the mosque shut. Yes.
so look, while fundamental rights are guaranteed by the Constitution, like many people say, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. right? You will not compromise the country in order to just protect the constitution. So I think it is valid to have national security exemptions to certain rights. Like, for example,
Certain religious rights.
yes, like, for example, today we curtail hate speech and incitement to violence, which is illegal. You could go to jail. You can't say you're violating my freedom of speech if I'm standing up
Absolutely.
and giving a speech and saying, yes, sabko maar dalo, in sabko maar dalo, inke ghar jala dalo. I mean, this is not freedom of speech. This is
Absolutely.
so. So if what 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 is valid in that sense is the government is able to go to a court and say that, look, this particular, look at the Lal Masjid case in Pakistan, right? Musharraf invaded the Lal Masjid and there was like gunfights going on for a long time. Why were there guns in the masjid? Like, people should come to pray, not accumulate. So if you
There were
can,
also guns in the masjid. Somewhere in the 1970s, I believe, armed militants entered the Kaaba Sharif as well.
1980s,
So
yeah,
they haven't even spared the Kaaba Sharif, for
yeah,
that matter. They haven't even spared the Al Aqsa Mosque in Israel or Palestine.
yeah.
And so
That was
they
during
seem to be
Hajj.
targeted. Yes.
It was during Hajj, in the janaza, in the dead body, they hid guns and they took it in. So what happens now is then the government is now under pressure to check every janaza that comes into the haram the next future. So the terrorists, it's like women suicide bombers, right? Once a woman becomes a suicide bomber, then now all women will be checked. And so suddenly, when every time the terrorists and extremists break a taboo, then they make it miserable for the rest of the women.
The
Like,
rest of the population. But then it's very unfortunate that the population, instead of blaming the terrorists, start blaming the government for trying to take precautions. We move on to our next question since you spoke about Pakistan and you also spoke about invasion. So while some people believe that dialogue is the best way to resolve the long-standing dispute over Kashmir between the two countries, others believe that the best way this can be resolved is if India invades Pakistan and annexes Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which we also call POK. And you've quoted in some of your interviews that if India wants, it can easily annex POK. So why do you think India is holding back, especially when the timing seems to be so ripe? You know, when half of Pakistan's army is fighting the Taliban's at the Afghan border, why do you think India is holding back?
so militarily speaking, India is now significantly superior than Pakistan, conventionally speaking. So if you have a conventional war, India will easily defeat Pakistan and take back POK. But the problem is that Pakistan has a nuclear deterrence. And so India has this dilemma. If you defeat Pakistan conventionally, will they escalate to the nuclear war? We just, we had this Kargil Vijay Divas, and during the discussions I was reading, and I was astonished that Pakistan had actually moved nuclear weapons closer to the border during the Kargil war. So that's one reason why. But the second
Hmm.
reason is India's prime minister himself has been telling in international forums that this is not an era of war. So India cannot be seen as being an initiator of a conflict to expand its borders, given the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. So in the few years around this, as long as we continue to talk about this era as not an era of war, that Prime Minister Modi said in Samarkand in
Hmm.
the previous SCO, which was quite celebrated worldwide and repeated again in every SCO and G20 declaration. So that's another reason why India has never been an expansionist state. All the wars
Hmm.
that India has fought have been defensive wars.
Yeah.
So India does not, at least the modern India post 1947 India has expanded. Like, for example, Sikkim has become part of India, but India has not invaded any country and taken the territory of another country. But the third
Hmm.
thing with the POK, the problem with POK is this. Uh, Even if India were to say, in a very quick strike within a day or two, take the entire POK back militarily, and then there's instant intervention from the international community, there is a ceasefire, so no opportunity for escalation.
Hmm.
That would bring in millions of more Muslims into India. So if India wants just the land without Pakistanis who are now Kashmiris, second or third generations,
Yeah, not demographically though, but
uh,
just because they went
uh,
there and settled
yeah.
down. Yes.
So, but they are there. So, what is India going to do? First, India is going to start a war. occupy territory and then ethnically cleanse them, send them away. I mean, imagine the horror of the world at all the human rights violations that will have to be committed. You will have to kill people to drive them out of their land where they are living for the last 60, 70 years. So all of those things are just pipe dreams of what is potentially going to happen. The best case scenario would be like, if India ever wants, is that Kashmiris who live in POK themselves rise in an uprising against India and seek some kind of autonomy or emergence with India, and then that happens. That is the only way where the international community will also be willing to accept that. And India should also learn the lesson from what's happening with Russia, one of the most powerful countries, the second most powerful country in the world. When it basically violated some of the international norms, it has more or less become pariah in at least half of the world. And that's
Hmm.
not something that India would like to risk at this moment when it has a momentum towards development, towards growth. Everything is going India's way. The economy is rapidly going. It has become the fifth largest economy. Very soon it will be the third largest economy. India's soft power
Right.
has increased. India's diasporas are doing well. Why ruin that?
Right. Moving on to the next question, you also speak extensively about improving the life of women living in Islamic societies. So, let's get down to the Kashmir conflict, which has been happening for 3 decades. It's obvious that women have suffered the most. They've been impacted the most negatively in these 30 years of conflict. Do you think the government of India has done enough to sort of change their lives and to provide them relief, progress, and productivity? Do you think more needs to be done for the women in Kashmir? Because we also, this question is actually centered around the fact that 9,000 women in Kashmir have gone missing, and the report has recently come out. And the NTRB claims that it's because these women were, most of them were domestically abused and or socially abused, and they went off in search of a better life.
Yeah, but where did they go? So
Yes,
at least
that's the
find a
point. They choose to be missing, apparently. Yes.
So look, in any conflicts, whether it's a conflict, whether it is war, whether it's environmental damage like flooding, rainfall, whether it is shortages of food like famine, in all these conditions, women suffer the most. Women,
Absolutely.
even under normal circumstances, you'll be astonished if you look in some of the developing countries' data. Let's say that a family has 100 rupee income per month. Sometimes the male of the house, the main male of the house, is using up 50 of it, and the whole family is using 50 of it. And then among the family, the male are using more, the boys are getting more. And in the end, the
Whatever's left over goes to the woman.
yes, the mom gets nothing in the end because she first feeds the husband and then the boys and
Yeah.
then the girls, then herself, right? So the women are the heroes of all societies wherever in the world they are, and that is why I think that in any moment of crisis, women are biggest targets and biggest sufferings. Especially they lose their husbands in the war, they lose their children to police. So I
There's more to it. There's more to it. Apparently, in the Kupwara district of Kashmir, northern Kashmir, when there was militancy happening, so the militants used to knock on the doors of people and they used to tell the women that you need to give up one son for
for battle.
even that's tormenting for a woman to give up her child for jihad.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about it. At least in India, some of the practices, like in Egypt, for example, the military used to rape the family members of extremists and terrorists and insurgents that they used to capture. So women are a target of all kinds of violence. I mean, you saw what happened in Manipur, women made
Yeah.
naked, raided. So
Yeah.
I think there has to be a need for a lot of there's a lot has to be done broadly for the general improvement of women and respect for women, but especially in conflict zones. I wish that there are more NGOs which are just focused on increasing awareness of the challenges that women face, and Muslim women too. There are lots of challenges. One of the most tragic things are that apparently in India, across country, in many places, Muslim women are the main breadwinners of the family. So they're not only doing everything that the wife and mom is supposed to do, but they're also the breadwinners, while the loser husbands are unemployed. So
It's
there are
all,
two.
and also there's the problem of triple talaq, which
Uh,
the government has banned. Yes, and there was also the unfortunate case of Shah Banu, which the current government is completely against. Shah Banu, it was her case that actually triggered the need for abolishing triple talaq. But again, that was taken as a blow to the fundamental rights of Muslims. That was the reaction that came out.
so let me say one thing and then I'll address that issue. So there are two stories about women in India or all over the world, especially in the Muslim societies, that are not true. One, a story of
Hmm.
their heroism,
Hmm.
everything that they do, and the other is the story of their suffering, everything that they suffer. There has to be more awareness of both.
Hmm.
The triple talaq issue, I was listening to um Asaduddin Owaisi from Hyderabad, and it was very interesting what he said. He's saying that while triple talaq has criminalized triple talaq, it hasn't solved the problem of women because now men are simply abandoning them.
Yes,
So you are still married to this loser, and
but you're not
you're
free to
abandoning.
move on with your life.
And
Yes.
the second thing is that if someone does uses triple talaq to divorce, that person goes to prison, but the divorce is not there. The marriage is still valid. So now, after 2 or 3 years, when your loser husband comes out of prison, who now hates you more because you sent him to prison, you are still married to this loser. So
Yes.
I think there's something wrong with that law. They should have made the divorce valid, but send the triple talaq user to jail. I think that would have been a better form of the law.
How about UCC? Do you think that that will help reduce some of the communal clashes that keep happening in different parts of India?
I think it will increase. So there are 3, 4 things about the UCC. It's a very complex thing. You'll have to give me a few more minutes to explain that, or we can have a separate discussion on it. UCC, in principle, is what we call as DPSP, directive state policy in the Constitution. There are many directives there which the Constitution, for example,
No, but the only one I would like you to focus on really briefly is about the
UCC.
topic that we touched, the triple talaq, for example. Don't you think that would, if we have uniform divorce laws in the country, that would help women of all communities, including Muslim women?
Reforming those triple talaq laws definitely can potentially improve the life of Muslim Indians, but it's not going to solve all the other communal issues that you have because that law has already passed. It was passed in 2019, and
Mhm.
the triple talaq. So you see what's happening in Haryana today. So UCC has many issues. For example, to argue that we will pick only on UCC and not other directive principles of the Constitution is something that needs to be answered. Why are you picking this law and not that? And when it comes to even UCC, it doesn't affect only Muslims, it also affects Hindus. So, for example, the government has not yet answered whether the Hindu United family aspect will go away, whether the all the Adivasis and all the tribals who have their own personal laws, will that go away? Will the Sikh Marriage Act, the Anand Marriage Act of 2012, will that also go away, or you will give exemptions to everybody and just target Muslims? Then it is not about the Constitution, it is about targeting Muslims in an election year. I wish that the BJP had brought this after the elections or a bit before. Plus, we don't know what is going to come in place. When people say uniform civil code, we haven't seen a draft. Show me the draft, then I can tell you whether it protects fundamental rights of the Indian Constitution or it does not. So that is, when you talk to Muslims, they say some very strange things. Like one guy told me, "तो क्या हम अब फेरे करेंगे शादी के लिए सात फेरे?" So they don't know what
Yes,
is.
I know.
Yeah,
There is definitely a lot of there are lots of rumors going around about what UCC really is, and some of these rumors have been speculated on purpose, just to stall the government's plans. I believe so.
if the government will
Anyways,
tell us what UCC is, then it will not be
yes,
there, right?
absolutely. It was a pleasure having you on the show, Dr. Muqtedar Khan, and all your helpful insights. I do hope that the government and the civil societies are taking note of some of the ideas and solutions that you mentioned on the show. And dear viewers, please stay tuned as we come back to you with more such shows. Thank you so much.
Yana, it was nice talking to you. I'm a big fan of your work, and I follow you very closely, especially on Twitter. And I think you are a very brave woman. The issues that you take up are indeed very challenging. Thank you.